This is the Pierburg 2E3 for the Volkswagen T25. I've completely stripped this down, and in this video I'm going to use a Carb rebuild kit to put everything back together. For reference, I'm using the workshop manual for the 2E3. I'm using the transporter construction operation for the water-cooled box engine, the Pierburg 2E3 adjustments and settings, and the PDF by CJH on the Club 1890 forum, who's put together this guide using the same documents we've got there, and I'll go through this. And finally, the Solex and Pierburg Haynes manual, which has got some really interesting information. So I bought this version from eBay because I need to rebuild the one on my van, and I didn't want to break it at all. So I'm using this as a test bed to do the rebuild kit, so I can learn everything about the carb before doing anything damaging to my own one. So this version of the 2E3 is specific to the Volkswagen T25. There's lots of different versions and configurations of the Pierburg. You'll see, if you look on eBay for different versions of it, you'll see the different entry points and exit points and however it all works inside. So if you're looking to get one for your own van, you need to get one with the number 025129015, which is stamped here. You'll see. What some will have is a letter after. This one doesn't, which means it's a really early version of the Pierburg. The other letters are A, which is for the automatic gearbox ones, and then the later ones are J and H. I've actually got a H version over here. Just put some gloves on because it's very dirty. So I got this other one in a job lot, and it looks like the previous owner had a fight with it, so it's in a bit of a state. So there we go. You see how dirty it is. And the difference is, you see, this is a H version. You've got the bent part here, and you've got this little filter here. And there's also a gap, a little flap within the actual choke flap here, which can open if you poke it. But this one I've got here did look like this when I got it off eBay. And I've cleaned it using white spirit and a Wins carb cleaner. Let's get that. Some Wins carb cleaner, sprayed it all in there and all the vents and everything, and used white spirit and a paintbrush, just jabbing it in. And what that did is just cleaned it all up, so it just got rid of all this kind of gunk that you see here, which is pretty horrific when you first open it up. So I'm going to be using the Brickworks rebuild kit. That gives it everything you need. It's got gaskets and seals and different parts. You may need a different diaphragm depending on the version you have, and I'll show you how to check for that later on. But you'll see this one is a shorter version here. Later models had this longer one. Okay. So in this video I'm going to use the Brickworks rebuild kit, and along with these parts that I've removed from the carburetor. You'll see there's a big array of parts here. So you've got the float and float needle here, the jets, the mixture screw, the accelerator pump, and then you have the diaphragm. So this is the choke pull down unit, the secondary pull down unit, secondary throttle pull down unit, and then the automatic choke parts here and here, and the idle control valve and the little heater. So I'm going to start fitting the jets to the top half of the carb. It just splits in two, like so. And this is the bottom half. I'm just going to move that out of the way for now. So turning upside down, we have 3 jets here that can be removable. There's others that can't. So the first one is the primary one, which is this one, and it's got a number 102.5 on it if you ever need to get a replacement one, and that goes on this side here, near the primary Venturi here. So I'm just going to slightly screw those in for now. The secondary one is number 110, and that goes on here. And then the air corrector jet goes here. Now it's important to use a screwdriver that fills essentially the whole of the space there. Because these are made of brass, they're very, very soft. You don't want to damage them as you do it. There we go. There we go. So that's the jets fitted. So the next thing I'm going to fit is the float needle and float. So what happens is fuel comes into the carb here through from the fuel pump, and it will exit here, going back to the fuel tank. What the float needle does is allow fuel to come through this gap down into the float bowl. If the needle is completely shut, goes all the way in, no fuel will come down, it will just go straight back to the fuel tank there. And this is the actual float. So depending on the level of the fuel that's in the float bowl, this will move up and down and push the needle up and seal it off. Okay. So the float, sorry, I'll just move that out. The float that I got in the Brickworks kit is this one here, and this is the original. You'll see this one fits nicely in there and then just drops straight out. The Brickworks one, however, gets stuck, so that's just no good. So I'm not going to use that. I'm actually going to reuse the original because it just seems to be in good nick. It seems to be doing what it should. The rubber part at the end is in good nick there. So what it has is a little metal clip here. That goes on the end. Let's try and get it on. Okay. And then that hooks through this gap in the float there, just there. So you see that kind of secures it against that. Okay. There's a pin that secures the float in place. And that just needs tapping across. So just align that up. Okay. Let's make sure it's lined up. Okay, so you see how the float moves freely there, and it controls the float needle. You can test this by sucking on this pipe, and then put your finger over here, and it will, hopefully, if it's all working, you won't be able to pull anything through. Okay, so we need to take a measurement here. In the settings guide, there's this information to cut out this template. And that'll allow you to work out that if the float's working at the right level. It gives you measurements between 28mm and 30mm, but that's wrong according to the Haynes manual. The Haynes manual gives that measurement for many of the vehicles in here. So like you've got Volkswagen Polos or the Vauxhall Cavaliers. But for the Volkswagen Transporter, which is what we've got obviously, the float level needs to be between 27.5mm plus minus 1mm. So the template that I've created is 26.5 and then 28.5. So as long as it fits between these two measurements, we should be fine. So I'll hold it at 30 degrees roughly and position this over it. And you'll see it's just under 28.5 and just over 26.5. So as long as it's under that measurement, which it appears to be, that should be fine because we've got that tolerance of 1mm. Okay. So onto the bottom half of the carb, and I'm going to fit the mixture screw for a start. That looks like this. The rebuild kit comes with a another O-ring there that you can fit on. So the mixer screw goes in this hole here, and what that does is control how much CO2 to fuel ratio goes into the carb. So when removing the mixer screw, what I did is screwed it all the way in, but counted how many turns it took to do that. Because I've bought this carb off eBay, I have no idea whether that's actually a good setting for it to be at, but that's what I'm going to return to. So what I'm going to do is screw it all the way in, and then screw it back out 2 3/4 turns, because that's what it came with. So it takes a while to screw in. There we go. So I've reached the bottom now, so I'm just going to unscrew it. 1, 2, and then 3/4. If I actually put this on the van, I'll be able to see if it's what kind of setting that is, and make adjustments then. Okay, so whilst everything is off, I'm going to check the second stage mechanism to make sure it works how it should do. So this is the primary throttle plate here. So as you accelerate, put your foot down on the pedal, it pulls this open. You'll see this. What it also does at the same time is activates this cam here, which connects to the accelerator pump, which I'll be fitting in a bit. So as that's turned, more air can come into the engine, and more fuel is pumped into the engine through the accelerator pump there. What also happens, as you'll see here, is the second Venturi cannot open up to a certain point, because it's locked by this lever here. So as I accelerate hard, going up to a fully open, you'll see now that can open. So it allows you to go even faster in the van. So what I'm going to check now is the measurement here, because what you don't want to happen is there to be any movement in this section here. And you'll see there is actually on this one. I had a problem with the carburettor on my van, which meant that I would hit a certain speed, and this second Venturi would stay open, and it would cause the revs to stay high, and it wouldn't go down again until I switched off the engine and restarted, because the vacuum was keeping this open. And it's got the same problem with this carb here actually. So the measurement between this U-channel here, it needs to be 0.4 millimeters on both sides between that. And you can see, because there is a bigger gap, it's actually allowing that to move open when it shouldn't do. So what we need to do is use a feeler gauge. So 0.4 millimeter feeler gauge, and then check the gap between that. So we need to get, so that side's okay, and then we need to squeeze that one in. So we just need to use a pair of pliers just to squeeze these together slightly. Okay. So 0.4 and 0.4. Just about. Okay. So you see now it only opens very, very slightly. The second measurement we have to take at this point is this screw here. So what we need to do is jam the primary Venturi open, so this can move it out a little bit, and then use an elastic band around there, just to keep the second stage part shut. So you see there's a bit of resistance there, but the elastic band's keeping that shut there. So what we want that to do, this screw, we're going to put a bit of paper under there. I'm following CJH's recommendation here for this process. So what that needs to do is go under there. It just needs to grip it, which it is actually doing at the moment. What I'm going to do is unscrew it slightly, just to see what it's like without that. So you see, now it's unscrewed, it's not gripping the paper. Right. Okay, just going to keep moving that until it grips. Okay, so it's just gripping the paper now. So now that it's gripped the paper, we just need to just turn it 1 extra quarter, just like that. There we go. And that adjustment's fine now. You see, it's nice and sturdy there. There's not much slack in there at all. The next part I'm going to fit is the part load enrichment valve, and that goes here on this side of the carb. What you'll get in the kit is two of these red parts, gaskets, whatever they're called, and this one has to go through this section here, and you put the other one up. And then there's this tiny little bit that goes on the end there, which has got an O-ring on it. And that needs fitting onto this here. Give it a good push. There we go. Let's fit it. I'm just going to tap it slightly with a hammer. Make sure that's on. Okay. Now there's a spring that works against this part to close the valve. Depending on the pressure inside the carb, this moves in and out, allowing more fuel in. Okay, so the spring fits there. That fits over that part there. Let's move that one out of the way. There we go. That's fitted to that side. Goes on there. There's also another gasket there. Goes here. And there's 2 screws that secure it in place. Okay. You can see how those holes line up. Just tightening those up. So there we go. That's the part load enrichment valve fitted with the new gaskets. So now I'm going to fit the accelerator pump. At the start of the video I mentioned that you may need a different size diaphragm depending on the model of carburetor you've got. This is the accelerator pump outer part, and depending on the size of this depends on what size diaphragm you need. So you see this is the actual longer one. It's too long for this section. So I had to buy another part like this, which is a smaller one. I think it's 13mm. So the Brickworks kit comes with the 19mm anyway. So if you've got a later model carburetor, you should be fine. But I think these are only like £4 or something like that, this extra one. Also at the beginning of the video, I'm not sure if I mentioned it or not, but I bought the kit from Brickworks for a specific reason. And that's because I had previously purchased a kit from eBay, but the quality of the parts in the kit are just not up to scratch. And an example of that is these diaphragms. So this is the original diaphragm that was in the carburetor. This is the Brickworks one, and this is the one from another eBay kit. Okay. Now CJH pointed this out in his PDF, so it's down to him that I actually checked this, but I'll show you the difference. The original, so the strength of that ball bearing is really quite strong. The Brickworks kit, not as strong, but that might be gunked up, but it's still pretty strong. And then this is the eBay kit, and there's just nothing to that spring. So what that will do will actually affect the amount of fuel coming into the carburetor and affect performance, so just don't bother. Okay, so to fit the accelerator pump, what we have is this little red thing. That goes in the hole. There's this radioactive warning sign piece of metal that goes on there. Yep, then the spring, then the diaphragm on there. Make sure it's lined up this way because there's a little peg within the accelerator pump which lines up there. So that fits on the top. Okay, and then there's 4 screws that just go in and hold that in place. It's just very stiff. Okay, so there we go. That's the accelerator pump in place. So you'll see now as you turn the throttle, the cam here moves the accelerator pump, and the spring moves against it. So now that the accelerator pump is in place, I'm going to fit the pump injector. And that squirts fuel straight into the primary Venturi here, so it just sits like that. So there's an O-ring that comes in the pack, that just goes on the end, and there's a little red filter. This doesn't come in the rebuild kit, so try and use the one you've already got. Once those are on, you can just slot it into this section here. It just goes in, push it down. So normally I'd want to point it this way, but I'm actually going to turn it around so it's squirting this way. Because what I'm going to do is put some fuel in the float here, the float bowl, and then use this syringe to measure how much fuel is coming out in each stroke. If it's too much or too little, what I can do is adjust this screw here on this cam, and it'll adjust how much fuel is actually coming in every time the accelerator is pressed down. So I'll just do that now. I'm just going to put some fuel in here. Okay, so now I've put the fuel in there and I'm getting high off the fumes. So what I'm going to do is turn the accelerator, the throttle, 5 times. And each time I do it, I'm going to do it for 3 seconds, and there's going to be a 1 second gap between it. What I'm looking for is a measurement of 1.35 millilitres per stroke. So by doing it 5 times, I want this to be 6.75 millilitres. So the mark we're looking at is, where are we, 7. It's just there. So just after that mark there, which if I've got a knife or something, I can just mark on. So I'm just going to make a mark there. Okay, so I've scratched it to the mark that we want. So I've squirted some through for a start, just to make sure the fuel is actually coming through. So now I'm going to position this here. And then start turning the throttle. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that gives me 5 millilitres. So it's not enough. So what I'm going to have to do is adjust the cam to actually give me slightly more per stroke. So I've emptied the fuel out of the carb here so I don't spill it everywhere, which I've already done, as you can see. And what I want to do is adjust this screw here, because this cam controls how much fuel goes into the carburetor. So I've already unscrewed it, and you'll see it moves left and right. So because when it's over this side, it's already primed slightly, so it's already pushed in a slight amount. You're going to get less fuel coming through. So what I want to do is push it all the way over to that side. Now, I can't actually move it any further than that, so that might be the maximum I can move this. But I'm going to screw it up and then we'll try again. Okay, so I've actually pushed this in a bit further, just to make sure it's really solidly in, because I think a bit of air was coming in here, affecting how much was coming through. So I'm going to try again. 3. 2, 3. 2, 3. 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we're at the perfect amount now. So it's 6.75, which is exactly the amount we want. So it's 1.35 millilitres per stroke coming out of here. So now we know that enough fuel is coming out of the pump injector. Just need to turn it around so it's actually pointing towards the primary Venturi here. So we want the squirt to go straight down that little nick there. So just aligning that up and making sure it's pushed right down. Just takes a bit of force. There we go. So I'm just going to test it. I think there's a bit of fuel left in there. Yeah. So you see that squirting straight down there. I'm making a mess of my top. Okay, so back onto the top half of the carb. What I'm going to do now is fit the automatic choke mechanism. So that's what this is here. What that does is control this flap. So on a cold day, this will be closed, nearly closed, making sure it chokes the amount of air coming into the engine so it doesn't die. As the engine slowly warms up, this flap will slowly open up until it's fully open. So that's controlled by this mechanism here, and you'll see this lever on the side. What this does is attach to this part, which has the coil inside. So this is connected to the 12-volt ignition live, and as this heats up, this coil starts moving out. So you'll see it move out like that. And what that will do in turn is turn this lever, which will open up the flap here. As well as the 12-volt on this, it's connected to the water-cooled system. So the hot coolant will go through there, as well as the electrical heater, and that will turn out, and then that will open up the choke flap. Okay. So for a start, I'm going to fit the choke pull-down unit. That fits onto the carburetor here. And what that does is vacuum comes from this pipe to the bottom end of the carburetor, and the vacuum sucks this section here. And what that will do is control a part of the automatic choke there, so it will prevent it going too far. I'll show you how that works once that's fitted. But this section goes in here, little hole, and you'll see it just clips in. You just push that into position there. Make sure you can see that hole there, because there's a roll pin, and that just needs hammering through. Best to do it from the bottom actually, so you don't damage the jet when you're doing this. Completely jabbed into my top there. Okay, so then now that's fixed in position. There's an adjustment screw here, which we might have to adjust later. I'll show you that shortly. The vacuum pipe that goes down to the bottom, what that has inside it, if you're lucky, is this little restrictor valve. Now, this carb actually didn't come with one of these. There wasn't one in the pipe, but this one is from the one from the job lot. So I've pulled this out just to show you, and what that does is just got a really tiny hole, so it's probably got 0.1 millimetre, 0.2 millimetres, and that just stops the strong vacuum pulling through and slapping this vacuum shut, damaging the diaphragm inside there. That's the only reason that's in there. So if you don't have one, I don't think it's fatal to the operation, but it's good to have if you do. Okay, so now I'm going to fit the automatic choke, and that attaches to the 3 screws here. But first, there's a little cam inside this part, which controls the flap, and there's a lever that attaches to that, so you just need to move it in there like that, and it will hook in, so you can see how that controls the flap. Okay, So that attaches to this white bit here. Let's do it that way. Which is it? There we go. So that goes in like that. And there's a tiny washer. There we go. And a clip that holds this in place. So I'm just going to try and fit that while it's here. There we go. So that holds the lever onto the automatic choke. I'm just going to line up those holes. There we go. So there's 3 screws that secure this to that section there. Okay, so that's now secure on there. And you'll see how this lever now uses that mechanism to control the choke flap. So I'm going to put the 2 halves together now, so then I can make measurements on the choke flap. I'm using the gasket that comes with the Brickworks kit. I'm fitting these gaskets dry in this demonstration, but when you're fitting it yourself, if you're going to be moving it on and off a lot of the time, the dry ones can get stuck together. So you can lubricate it with petroleum jelly or grease, and that'll stop it sticking, but still create the seal. So I'm putting that there like that. And when fitting the 2 halves together, you'll see this pipe here that actually goes into that gap. And so as long as you get that lined up, the rest of the carb actually just slots in where it should do, like so. So I've put the 2 pieces together, the 2 halves of the carb, and then I've used an elastic band, you see this one running over here, just to hold the 2 pieces together. Because what happens is the fast idle cam here, this screw actually pushes against this section, so it'll push it apart, so that's why I'm holding that together. There's also another elastic band I'm running across here, and that's to pull the automatic choke this way, as if it was being held by the coil. Okay, so the measurement we want to take here is this the front of the choke flap. So what you need to do is make sure the screw, this screw here is on the top, the very top of there. So that's just sitting there. Okay, and you'll see the choke flap's now completely closed. Okay, what we need to do is put pressure on the choke pull down unit here by pushing in on this section. So there's a little screw here, so if I need to make adjustments I will do with an Allen key. So I'm just going to push into there. And you'll see the choke flap now moves. So the space for this carb is 3.3 millimeters. I've got this drill bit which is actually 3.3 millimeter width. So that's the perfect size for me to measure the front of there when I'm pushing in. Other models of the carb is 2.5 millimeters. So just check that you've got the right measurement for your own one. So I'm going to push in here, and I'm going to put that in the front. You see, it's actually just slightly too small. Okay. So I'm going to use the Allen key to adjust the screw here, which will enlarge or make that smaller. So I want to make it larger. So I'm going to screw it out. So anti-clockwise. Just going to try again. You see now it's way too big. So I'm just going to screw it back in slightly. You can suck on the pipe connected to the pull-down unit, but I'm just going to use the pressure on this end here. There we go. So that's the right measurement for that. So I'm now going to fit the heating element to the automatic choke. There's a square hole here, so we just need to line that up with the lever when we're fitting it, just to make sure that's attached. because that will control the choke there. And then there are 3 screws, and they just go in here. So before tightening the screws, you just need to line up this mark here. So you can twist this part here, like that, so those line up. If you are taking this off your own van, make a mark of where it currently is, because it's probably been put in that position for a reason. So try and get it back to the position you had on previously. Another good tip by CJH is to keep this on the van when you're taking the carb off, because otherwise you're going to have to unplug the coolant pipes here, and you're going to get coolant everywhere. So by unscrewing those 3 sections and knowing exactly where that is, you can take the carb off without messing with the coolant circuit there. So I'm just going to screw these in and secure those in place. There we go. Okay, next I'm going to fit the second stage throttle pull down unit. Again, this has got a diaphragm in there and acts as vacuum sucking in through here and pulling this section up. I'll just move the top half out of the way. So this little elbow here clips onto that part and it screws in there. And what that does is pull upwards, so pulling against this here. But of course it won't do anything until a certain stage of the throttle. So there we go. So that will pull against this. It's quacking at me. Okay, they're secure. And so the elbow just sits on that part there. Yeah, and as I explained, that pulls upwards and then opens the secondary throttle plate here. Okay. The vacuum pipe for this part touches into this section and then bends backwards on itself into this here. There we go. So the next part I'm going to fit is the idle cutoff valve, which looks like this. That fits into the carb here. And what that does is, when you switch the engine off, this doesn't get any power anymore. And so there's a pin that shoots out, and that cuts off the fuel going into the carb and stops the engine running on. So you can test if this is working okay by using a 9-volt battery, which I'll do now. So connect the positive to the clip, the pin at the back, if I can. There we go. And then I'm going to earth at the front here, where this metal pie is. So I'm just hitting it a bit too hard there. There you go. So it clicks on and off. So that pin is moving backwards when I do that. The O-ring that was with the original one is all perished, as you see here. So I've used 2 O-rings in here to act as a seal. I've also used some PTFE tape, just thread seal tape, just so we get a proper seal in that. So that just screws in. So I'll do that now. And there we go, so that's in position now. So the next part I'm going to fit is the 12-volt heater. It looks like this. That fits to this part of the carb here, just under the idle cutoff valve. And what that does is heats up this section of the carb, making sure it runs okay in cold weather conditions. It's connected to the thermally switched 12-volt system, as well as the small heater that's in the actual manifold, so it's like a hedgehog-looking thing. So those 2 things, when the coolant system gets up to a certain temperature, these 2 things switch off because they're no longer needed as the carb is up to a certain temperature already. So that just fits here. And it's screwed in place with one screw. So there we go, that's in position now. So now the idle cutoff valve and the heater is in place, I'm going to fit the vacuum pipe to the pull-down unit, because that connects here. As I mentioned earlier, there's a tiny valve that will go in that pipe. I'm not going to fit it now, but that would normally sit in there, restricting the actual vacuum that hits that. There we go, that just connects into that part there. Okay. On the rear of the carburetor, or front, I suppose, facing the front of the van, are these two other vacuum pipes here, the two vacuum connections. This one runs to the airbox, and in the UK you don't really need that. So mine was actually bunged off on the one on my van, and it actually ran better when it was bunged off, so that's something to think about. This is the vacuum pipe to the distributor, so this one is important and you must have that one connected. Okay, the next part I'm going to fit is the fuel filter. So this one goes into this, the inlet pipe here. And this is what the original one looks like. There we go. So I'm going to reuse this. And the reason because I bought this one off eBay. You see it's very white. And it was already split when I got it. And the quality of this is just so flimsy. I don't think it will stand up to its job for too long. So the best thing to do is reuse this essentially reinforced filter that actually comes with the carb. You'll notice there's two little pegs here, I don't know if you can see that, but that allows you to actually take it out of there by screwing in slightly and then pulling it out. But fitting it's dead easy, you just literally push it in place. There we go. So you see that's now fitted there. And that'll filter out any particles and bad bits coming from any other part of the fuel system and going into the carburetor there. So the last part of the rebuild kit, you get this gasket. What this one does is goes between the bottom, there we go, it fits over there, and the manifold spacer, which is this one. So that goes there. This is really important to have, the spacer, because it lifts the carb away from the manifold. Without that, you're going to get this lever hitting the manifold and you won't be able to actually get full speed. It's going to affect the performance of the carb. So that, when you're attaching it, make sure you've got that in place. The rebuild kit doesn't come with one between the spacer and the manifold, so I've actually cut this one out of gasket paper. This is 0.4mm gasket paper, and I just used a pencil to outline it and then cut it out to the same size. So that'll fit between there. There we go. And it's important to have all these gaskets in place because the nature of the carb, it is vacuum based, so any air leaks are going to affect the performance of this. The carb that I had on my van didn't have any spaces between any gaskets between the manifolds, so I replaced those, but it unearthed lots of other issues with the carb because there was other air leaks and misadjustments, which I'm now addressing. Hopefully, now I've done this one, I can do the one on my van, and that's the end of that.